Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. And by golly, would you look at that, 2025 is already pretty much past us, just as soon as it began. Dude, I still remember that Switch 2 teaser reveal like it was last month. 2025 was a pretty big and turbulent year for me, at least as far as my life standards go so far. I got to visit Malta, country number 9, super lovely this time of the year. I also unfortunately relapsed into my obsessive compulsions. Anyways, the more important thing is that this was also the year that Nintendo's next generation console, the Switch 2, finally released, which on my side not only helped us reach over 10,000 subscribers, but it was also a contributing factor to me branching out my gaming palette. Because for as much as I've always loved gaming, I also can't say that I ever cared too much about branching out beyond what I was familiar with growing up, as I was already happy as I were with Mario as well as other obscure childhood games like Freddy Fish, Quest for Glory or Lost Ninja. Plus I also had a bunch of other hobbies at bay to keep me afloat. But as the years go by and my YouTube channel has become a bigger part of my life, I certainly began exploring this suggestion more, since it does get a bit tiring to only talk about Mario on here, and having more games to not only yap about, but also have near and dear memories with, is something you can never go wrong with. I never knew how much I'd love games such as Breath of the Wild, Pikmin 4 or Celeste, but I did, and I'm happy I gave them a chance. So now that I've not only started to play more games, but we've also entered a brand new console generation, I figured it would be fun to start an annual video series where I rank every new Nintendo game each year from worst to best. Starting with the controversial 2025. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, but seriously, at least for me, this was a pretty damn strong first year of the Switch 2. For as much controversy as this year harnessed, whether due to increased game prices, or just seemingly weird game design choices, if we're just judging it purely by quality, yeah, I mean it's probably not better than 2017 or 2023, but even despite that, I'd be pretty confident in saying that this was probably one of the strongest and most hype-worthy gaming years of all time. What with the release of a brand new Mario Kart game, unexpected return of 3D Donkey Kong, Kirby Air Riders and Metroid Prime, and even in the third-party department, you had games like Silksong and Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 finally coming out after so many years of waiting. Not that I've played those two yet, we'll get there eventually, but yeah. For the first year of the Switch 2, it was definitely a pleasant surprise where credit is due, despite how much YouTube grifters want me to believe it's not. And I'm glad I started so many new Nintendo franchises this year to prepare for this journey and video. Before we begin though, let's just set up some quick rules first. To nobody's shock, I hope, I'm only going to be including actual new games that came out this year for the ranking. So no re-releases of games such as Donkey Kong Country Returns, Super Mario Galaxy, or the 2 Zelda games, since they aren't technically new releases. And in Breath of the Wild's case, it would be especially unfair since that would map this year's entire selection anyways, which that's not even an insult, I just loved its open world experience so much, and the sense of awe that came with exploring its vast and lived-in world. The only exceptions to this re-release rule are going to be for the Switch 2 editions of Mario Party and Kirby and the Forgotten Land, simply because those two actually add sufficient amounts of new content that end up adding noticeable differences to the overall experience.
Yeah, Jamboree TV definitely added to the experience. I'm sure about that.
Dude, shut up! We haven't even begun the list yet. Oh yeah, and also there will be spoilers for these games I'm talking about, just a heads up. So with all of that being said, I say, let's finally begin my magnum opus of 2025. Enjoy. To be honest, I don't even know where to begin when discussing the absolute travesty that is the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Party Jamboree. I don't think I've ever stumbled upon an expansion to a game that's quite as poorly implemented, missed in potential, or just plain unfun. I don't even think it deserves to be called the Switch 2 edition, because there are no improvements made at all. When I first heard that Super Mario Party Jamboree was gonna get additional content after its release, I was admittedly pretty ecstatic, since Mario Party has never really been the kind of series to get post-game DLC, and there was a lot of potential for returning boards and minigames to come back. Unfortunately though, all we got were 2 bare-bones side modes, as well as 2 new party mode rule sets which should have just been in the game from the get-go. I don't even think more side content is an inherently bad idea, because the extra modes we did already have in the game were actually pretty engaging, but the ones we got here were just such meager and cookie-cutter showcases of the Switch 2's new gimmicks, it makes you wonder if there wasn't a better use of this development time. They were just so boring and monotonous, with no sense of challenge at all, or even online support for that matter. However, surely this can't be bad enough to ruin the game to the point that it's last on the list, right? Well, in 99% of cases, you'd be correct, and by all means, it shouldn't. Super Mario Party Jamboree, the game bundled with this expansion, is still an absolute blast. It's arguably the best Mario Party game of all time, just for how much and how packed its contents are. However, we're not including that in the ranking, and that's not even me being picky because it's technically not from this year. See, actually, calling this the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Party Jamboree is a huge and insulting lie. See, all of these new side modes and party mode rule sets I brought up, well, for some reason, ND Cube thought it would be a good idea if instead of them just being accessed through an island on the map like every other mode, they were treated as their own campaign separate from the actual main game. And the sheer idiocracy of this decision and how impractical it is something that will always baffle me. It's just a fucking DLC add-on. There's no way they thought this could stand up on its own, right? It'd be one thing if it were just the side modes, but even the new minigames and party mode rule sets can only be played if you access them from their Jamboree TV counterparts. But also, Jamboree TV doesn't contain the other side modes within itself, so their minigames aren't available in free play here. Seriously, how fucking incompetent do you have to be to not realize how impractical this is? Never mind how confusing this is gonna be for casual players. Meanwhile, the base game itself is left completely untouched, not even getting the resolution bump Jamboree TV has. I don't even think that detail is that bothersome, since the resolution difference is so minimal and Jamboree already looked good originally anyways, but it goes to show how much they did not give a shit about implementing the new content organically into the rest of the game. Because as another example, you know how this game has difficult achievements you can earn? Well, if you happen to earn them while playing party mode from Jamboree TV, you're not gonna get them. Good f***ing grief. I'm not usually a negative person when it comes to bad games. If I don't like something, I normally just won't care about it. It's just that everything revolving this supposed Switch 2 edition is so over the top idiotic, it makes me shocked that nobody on the development team thought to say something otherwise. The fact that Jamboree TV is also the first mode that shows up for you whenever you boot up the game, instead of, the actual game, is especially insulting as well. Literally everything is just impractical here. And because of this wholly poor implementation, I see no reason to rank this game based off of Super Mario Party Jamboree's merits, because this is not Super Mario Party Jamboree. There's no reason to get this release specifically to play it, because all of that can just be enjoyed from the original Switch 1 release of the game, which, is still compatible with the Switch 2. The only thing that sets this $20 more expensive version apart is Jamboree TV. And if ND Cube wants me so badly to see it as a separate game, then I'm gonna rank Jamboree TV as a separate game as well. Especially when that's the only thing that's new this year. The worst part is that even after this crashed out, I don't even think this is atrocious enough to be an F tier. That's how pathetic this all is. Technically, the fact that you still can play the main party mode, and the fact that the tag team rule set is enjoyable enough and adds a new perspective to it, does make Jamboree TV a little fun still. And for what it's worth, the new mouse-controlled minigames are pretty neat where credit is due. However, because of how impractical literally everything else also is about this release as a bundle, and how it actively makes the whole game harder to navigate, it makes it so hard to have anything good to say at all. And honestly, I think I gotta move on before I end up making this video demonetized. Bottom line is, this game is a whole embarrassment, which quite frankly killed almost all the faith I had in ND Cube going forward. On to a more positive note, however, Drag X Drive, why did he call it that? Is a game which, while I didn't really have any strong feelings for, I also didn't dislike it. I thought it seemed cute enough in the trailers, having you play basketball while being bound to wheelchairs, but it also didn't really seem to be much more than that, and the end product pretty much confirmed everything I expected going in. In a nutshell, it's pretty much just a glorified online tech demo for the Switch 2's new mouse gaming controls. And I mean, for what it's worth, it certainly works well enough. The controls make sense and are unbelievably responsive, and while the gameplay is inherently very competitive and certainly takes a while to fully master, the control scheme is at least simple and straightforward enough to the point that you don't feel completely out of your depth as a new player. It also helps that it's a team game, but yeah, it was honestly quite a bit more fun and engaging than I expected it to be, to the point that I've sometimes spontaneously come back to the game just for the heck of it, even if it's not a lot. On the whole, it's a more creative use of the mouse controls than whatever Jamboree TV did, however, there's still a reason this game ended up scoring so low on the list as well. And that's because there really is not much to do here at all. The only thing of really any value here is just playing the titular wheelchair basketball itself. And while it's fun and unique for what it is, nothing also ever really changes between matches, since it's always the same court, same player count, and same complete lack of gimmicks every time. It's really about as basic as you can get. There is also these single player challenges scattered throughout the main lobby, which I guess are meant to hone your driving skills, but honestly most of them are so unbelievably frustrating to win due to the strict timers and need to be super precise with your vehicle to the point that they're not even worth it. You do earn trophies for beating them, which raises your level and lets you unlock more cosmetic parts, but at the same time, considering how small and frankly bare bones this game is in terms of content, there's not really any incentive for me to get better, because I'm not gonna return to it a lot anyways. It's arguably my least played new game this year of the lot at only a little over 1.5 hours, and honestly it feels like I've already experienced everything substantial there is. If this was the Nintendo 3DS era, this sort of game would have just been bundled in with for free in the same vein as Face Raiders or R games, seeing as it's really just a gimmick demo. And even then, I'd argue those two games had marginally more content and charm. There is admittedly some charm for drag and drive still, mostly through all of the hand motions you can do with your controller, but it's pretty minimal. And otherwise, the entire art style and aesthetic is pretty drab and lifeless. Honestly, if only there was more content and more gameplay variety, I'd probably quite like this game, because it had a cool idea. It's just that the severe lack of things to do and serious replay value that makes it hard for me to really care about it most of the time. And so I can't be more generous than just putting it at the bottom of the okay tier. I guess I shouldn't have expected too much from a $20 game, and I mean at least it's just that instead of full price. In either case, it doesn't change how I feel about this game. Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment sure was a game I played this year. To be honest, I probably shot myself in the foot a little by playing this before even touching Tears of the Kingdom, but at the same time, Breath of the Wild is such an ambitious title, but it's taking its while to truly finish it. Although in either case, while I probably missed some background context as a result, which would have enhanced this game's story, I don't think it would have particularly affected my enjoyment. It's not like the plot is anything that out of the ordinary, it's just Zelda being transported back in time, and then they all wage a war against Ganondorf, leading to him being imprisoned underground, and setting the stage for the Tears of the Kingdom story. It's fine, whatever. I like that it's actually canon, unlike how Age of Calamity apparently wasn't, but the game is still nothing outstanding to play. Between all of the new Nintendo games this year, this is the one I was kind of the least looking forward to playing, as I've never been too big on hack and slash, and I think my concerns were pretty valid, as the gameplay loop is kind of monotonous. Not unfun, there is technically a wide array of attacks you can vary between, it just ended up boiling down to mashing the same buttons over and over again, and it didn't really feel like there was any variety between what different characters could do either. Besides that some of them dabbled in different elements, but like there's also elemental guns everyone can use anyway, so yeah. There wasn't even much difficulty on normal mode. It barely mattered if I took a few hits every once in a while, or heck, even if I were under-leveled by 10 levels. In either case, I breezed through it all. Was it my fault for picking normal instead of hard? Maybe, but how was I supposed to know normal was piss easy? If I could, I would have switched the difficulty settings halfway through, but that wasn't possible without starting over again, and no way was I doing that. Oh yeah, and the characters were also kinda boring. Most of them were just of the same breed of generic valiant and mature knights with almost no emotion. I did not care when Sonia died. Literally nobody outside of Calamo and the fake Link construct had any personality. Honestly, my favorite part of the game was just seeing their banter. Their friendship was the only thing I felt remotely emotional about in this game. Otherwise, everything else about this game was just fine at best. Honestly, the saddest part is that I wouldn't even say that this game is just not for me. I did still find the gameplay loop a little satisfying, it just wasn't diversified enough, and for most of the duration, I just kept asking myself when the game would be finally over. Would I go back to this game in the future? Probably not. I mean, on one hand, I do feel kinda bad about being so indifferent to this game, so I'll end off by saying that it was enjoyable enough to at least get a high C tier score. Okay, so this is probably gonna sound a bit blasphemous to some, but honestly, I kind of like the Nintendo Switch 2 welcome tour. Actually, why am I even pretending like this is unthinkable? Look, I agree that Nintendo charging money for what is essentially just a gamified manual is low and greedy. It really should have just been another free pack-in title with Drag and Drive. However, does the price tag suddenly make this game unspeakably horrible? No? I mean, I'm not gonna pretend it's some sort of masterpiece or anything, heck, even calling it a good game feels a little generous, but when you look at it for what it is first and foremost, a glorified tutorial for the Switch 2, I honestly had a more solid time than expected. Like, what can I say? It's charming to walk around the giant replica of the Switch 2 and its controllers. I thought it was cool to explore and look for all of the distinct features on each set. I liked learning about all the work that went into designing the system, and the minigames making use of the Switch 2's new features were actually surprisingly really difficult, making it fun to replay them and aim for a higher score. I don't think any of this is outstanding, but it's cute enough and more than they had to do. Even if I do think it's a little overkill how patronizing the NPCs are whenever you get full scores on a trivia quiz. Like, geez, you don't have to call me a mouse sensor master, it was just basic information, most of which I'll sadly forget soon anyways. Otherwise, the only knock I would really give this game is the pricing point, and even then, I don't really think it's a fair criticism. Because as dumb as it is with this game as a price tag, it's not something that changes the quality of the game itself. For physical released games, that criticism is especially dumb, because in the future, when used copies become more commonplace, the price is eventually gonna be lower anyways. For digital-only games like this and Dragon Drive, I suppose the price is a little more relevant since there's no other way to get them, but looking at the bright side, if it had to cost something, I'm also glad it's only $10. It's not something I take into consideration when rating this game, but for what it's worth, I got more time and content worth from the $10 here than I did for Dragon Drive, which was twice as expensive.
Actually, if you want to 100% this game, you also have to buy things like a 4K TV and a new Pro controller, which don't come with the console.
Okay, to be fair, that does actually make the initial pricing point even dumber, since you technically have to pay way more than $10 to beat the whole thing, but at the same time, considering this is an instruction manual at its core rather than a proper game, I see playing the minigames tied to those things as more of just a bonus if you have them, since you can still play the rest of the game and unlock all levels without even having touched them. I'm not defending this, I'm just saying it doesn't bother me too much personally. I do still think the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour is problematic enough, and nowhere more than just fine, but at least between the two tech demo Switch 2 games, I think this is easily the superior title over Dragon Drive, and I enjoyed enough to put it at the top of the OK tier. Okay, so picture this. Have you ever had a meal where as soon as you took your first bite, it seemed like the greatest thing ever, but then the longer you kept going as your hunger satiated, you realized it wasn't actually that great and you were just starving? Yeah, well, that's pretty much exactly how I felt about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Honestly, pretty much everything people were saying about this game was unfortunately true to a lesser extent. I was personally really excited to try the game out since while I'd never played a Metroid game before, I had played numerous other Metroidvanias before, namely the Robot Wants Kitty Flash series, and I would consider it to be one of, if not even my favorite game genre ever. I just love the general gameplay loop of starting off weak, but then the stronger you get and the more abilities you find, the more areas open up for you to explore, and on one hand, this game did deliver me on that, at least when it came to the main areas you explored. Atmospherically, the game is on point. The graphics are absolutely stellar, especially for a Switch 1 made game, and the soundtrack did an immaculate job at immersing you into the world building. Whether it was the serene Fury Green, badass Voltforge, or the horrifying Ice Belt. And the fact that it's all in 3D is neat as well. Even as someone who's not too big on the first-person shooter genre, this game made me enjoy even that thanks to everything else. I do think the levels are a little linear at times, but not so much it ruins the immersion. But you all know what the problem is. It's that fucking desert, mate. See, at first I did actually like this part of the game. Again, the atmosphere and visuals were nice, and I thought it was fun to ride around on the Viola bike and smash crystals. But at the same time, there's just not much to it. There's a few shrines scattered here and there which are nice, but otherwise it's pretty much just an empty void to travel through between areas, and after a certain point it just got so monotonous to backtrack between different levels. Especially since there's not even any fast travel and you can't skip most cutscenes. And here I'm supposed to believe Mario Kart World is the game of the bland open world? It's not even comparable to this game. Admittedly, I still like the desert a bit, and I wouldn't say it quite ruins the experience, but it definitely felt kinda pointless and poorly executed, especially because the bike I just talked about barely even gets used outside of this context. And I feel like if I ever replay the game, these issues would definitely grate on me even more. Especially the hunt for the green crystals, that got especially old. I also hated how Miles kept spoiling me on where to go next, as if the point of a Metroidvania isn't to just figure that out yourself. And I thought it was fun and charming too before that. I don't want to make it sound like I dislike the game, because where credit is due, there was a lot of clear passion put into it. And as a Metroidvania Andy, I absolutely loved most of my time here. It's just that it was also so close to being absolutely amazing. At the same time though, it's kinda clear the game had a troubled development, and they kinda threw a bunch of ideas at once into the game that didn't really blend together well. I'd say it's probably a good entryway point to the rest of the Metroid series, since the more hand-holding difficulty and linear nature of the game would probably ease you into what this game series is like, although personally it was definitely kind of inconsistent for me though, going from the greatest thing ever to boring within the span of minutes at times, which in the end evens out into just a really good high B tier game. So it's kinda like a Paper Mario Origami King situation, although maybe not as drastic. But yeah, turns out my take on the game is pretty cold. Starting from the top half of the ranking though, we make a huge leap in quality, as we already approached the 8th tier with our 5th best game, Mario Kart World. No, this game does not suck because it's $80, shut up. For as much dispute as this game has caused online, and for as many weird and frankly dumb decisions the game has that hold it back, Mario Kart World is also the first time that I can feel truly prideful in calling myself a Mario Kart fan. Don't get me wrong, this series has always been a fun pastime and one of my most impactful childhood franchises at that, but it's also never been that deep of a game series. It's just a silly little kart racer to play with friends, but usually with nowhere near as much content or gameplay depth as a lot of other Nintendo franchises, let alone other Mario series. However, all of that changed with Mario Kart World, a game which revolutionizes the Mario Kart mechanics to such an extent that it actively makes it harder to go back and enjoy the older installments. The gameplay of Mario Kart World is just on a completely other level. You can grind on rails, jump up on walls, charge jump in the air, and even chain tricks when going off ramps. All of it makes the driving experience so much more engaging than it's ever been in previous games, so even if the track count is lower than in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it doesn't matter because the traditional tracks we do have here are just way more technical than they've ever been before. And that's not the only major improvement this game brings to the franchise, because beyond that, Mario Kart World is also the first open world game in the series, putting all of the game's resident courses on a giant interconnected island. And while this specifically has gained a lot of notoriety, I think it's super cool how organic the world building is, especially as someone who has always wanted to explore Mario Kart tracks since the Wii days. That's why the free roaming specifically is actually my favorite mode from the game. It's just so relaxing to wind down and go wherever you feel like, and stumble upon missions and collectibles to give you something more to do. That said though, with this new open world also comes a new track type, the intermission routes, connecting each track, and they're... yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, they're a little mediocre. They're certainly fine enough, thanks no less to the gameplay mechanics of Mario Kart World, but layout-wise, they definitely don't hold a candle to the real tracks, since most of them are just glorified straightaways, and they don't even have dedicated soundtracks to make them stand out more. For the new Knockout Tour mode, the intermissions are great, since there's always tension to stay ahead and exploit every shortcut you see. However, for the main versus mode, it's a different story, since there's not really that much pressure to stay ahead until the last lap when you actually arrive at the destination track. Oh yeah, and that's right, you also only play one lap of the actual track you arrive at. And when there is also no way to properly disable these kinds of tracks online, leading to you pretty much being forced to play them most of the time, you can kind of see why that becomes a problem. And honestly, this is probably the biggest flaw in general that holds the game back from being higher. There's just quite a lot of missing customizable options, which sadly makes it a little harder to come back to the game without getting a little bored fast. And this isn't even the only example that needs fixing. Stuff like 200cc, being able to make your own custom Knockout Tour rallies, more battle modes, or in-depth unlockables would have gone a great way to make for an even more replayable experience. However, I also don't think it's quite the end of the world problem most people seem to think, because unlike previous games, Mario Kart World has so many modes to keep you busy, to the point I don't really think it's that big of a deal, since if you eventually get bored with something, there's always something else to do. And hey, with a couple of future updates and maybe even DLC, who knows? Nintendo is certainly taking the game in the right direction, improving some of its faults bit by bit every few months, so by the end of the console generation, it could very well land itself a much higher spot. For now, I think it deserves to stay down here, since it is easy to get tired of the game, but hey, that's also every Mario Kart game. For what it's worth, at least this is easily the best of the lot. Okay, I have a bit of a confession to make, guys, but I don't think Donkey Kong Bonanza was quite the make-all be-all this year, as I'd initially anticipated. That said though, holy sh**, playing through this gem as a longtime Donkey Kong and Mario Odyssey fan was probably among the happiest that I have ever felt playing a game in a long time. Like, what do you mean? They not only brought back Donkey Kong's roots from the grave, but also made a spiritual successor to one of my favorite games of all time simultaneously. It's honestly insane how they somehow managed to scratch almost every itch of what I like in games, and speak to some of my closest nostalgic memories just with this game alone. As a traveler at heart, I've always been huge on the collectathon genre, and the sense of exploring every nook and cranny of any given area. And since Odyssey pushed that idea to almost its fullest potential, you can imagine how happy I was to see Bonanza not only take that, but expand on it with DK's moveset. Being able to now even destroy the terrain is not only blissful, but adds yet another sense of depth to the gameplay and level design. And I love the even greater sense of freedom this brings for the collectathon gameplay. However, what truly immersed my joy was the plot. The story itself is nothing too special, I suppose. I like how it's a chronological prequel to Odyssey, detailing the events that led to Pauline's singing interest, and the friendship with DK is fun to watch, albeit tragic knowing how quickly it deteriorates in future Mario games. But what really got me were all of the references to old school Donkey Kong games. I grew up playing the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy a ton as a kid, and always thought it was sad how little it was referenced in newer games. But not only does this game pay a ton of tribute to it, but then in the second to last level, they brought back the f***ing Kremlin crew out of nowhere to hijack the plot, and with almost no indication of them being in the game either, up until this point. I was absolutely screaming that last stretch of the game. Like, you have no idea how garndash happy I was to see my favorite villain faction ever be brought back to life again after 20 years, and this time in 3D as well. Especially because they leaned fully into it with the old Kremlin sound effects and the fake out credits after beating King K. Rool. They knew how much we missed them, and they went all out in crafting the most charming and badass endgame they could. But after letting enough time pass, I realized that as much as this may be the greatest Nintendo game finale ever, I shouldn't rate the rest of the game just based off of its merits, as it's ultimately still a very small part of it. And I still had quite a few issues with the rest of the game as well, and I think all of it can be boiled down to one simple reason: it's just the worst Super Mario Odyssey. Outside of plot events, the general gameplay loop is nowhere near as polished or diverse, because while it is cool to be able to smash everything, the collectibles also become much more monotonous and uninteresting to collect, since it's usually the same story every time. Just spam the sonar and then dig into the ground. So the fact that many of them may have had other intended ways for you to find them ultimately becomes meaningless. Odyssey had much more variety in its moons, partly because you didn't have that easiness and actually had to look on your own, plus all of the capturable enemies you could possess made each moon stand out even more. Meanwhile, the closest equivalent you have to that here are the Bonanza transformations, which aren't anywhere near as deep. They're pretty much just the most basic forms of power-ups there are, giving you just higher speed or higher jumping or whatever. And most of them can also just be activated on a whim anyways, which really trivializes their specialness even more. And on another note, as much as I do like digging and crushing everything, it is also a gameplay loop that very easily gets overstimulating because of all the visual clutter on the screen, which sadly makes it really exhausting to play for extended periods of time. Maybe that's just a me problem, but it did hinder me from truly loving my experience with the game. I also had zero strong feels about the Emerald Rush DLC expansion, but whatever, that's just optional anyways. However, at the end of the day, Super Mario Odyssey is like the greatest game of all time, so pretty much anything would look worse next to it. I still absolutely loved Donkey Kong Bonanza, and while the new gameplay loop had some drawbacks which do hinder it from being a true S-tier masterpiece, it's not that major of a deal. And in the end, it's still an absolutely amazing title. Now, onto the complete opposite side of the spectrum, Kirby and the Forgotten Land plus Star-Crossed World is the perfect example of what a Switch 2 edition game should be like. Because would you believe it, not only does the base game actually get resolution and frame rate bumps, but the extra content is also actually implemented organically with the rest of the game. So you know what that means? I can actually rank this release based off of the original game's merits, and boy am I glad about that, because Kirby and the Forgotten Land is already by itself one of the best 3D platformers I've ever played. While I do have issues with it, such as how slowly Kirby moves, which makes it a little annoying to go back in 100% stages, on the whole it's just such a joyful and atmospheric little adventure, with breathtaking scenery, tons of puzzles and hidden secrets scattered throughout its levels, and it's just impossible to not have a smile on your face while playing it. And while I certainly didn't mind the 30 frames per second of the Switch 1 version, the 60 FPS of the Switch 2 edition is so smooth that I can't go back now. However, enough about that. What about the Star-Crossed World DLC? What's that like? Well, I mean, it's not anything completely mind-blowing, it's just more Forgotten Land content really. And that's good. Basically, some of the base game levels get hit by these blue comets as part of a side story, putting a unique spin to them, where the music gets a bit more futuristic, and you venture through entirely different parts of them, guided by these crystals you break. They're not quite as atmospheric as the normal levels, since the charm of them were they're abandoned and deserted to Stevex, but they're still pretty funky, and they make up for it by being actually shockingly difficult. Seriously, I am not exaggerating. Some of the new mouthful mode power-ups actually require you to be really swift and nimble to make it through, and as someone who always thought the mindless easiness was a little detrimental of the previous Kirby platformers, I'm so happy about this. Granted, Forgotten Land was never that easy to begin with, the final boss was always pretty insane for example, I'm just happy to see this DLC go even further. Now, the only question remains is, do I think this deserves to be S tier? To be honest, probably not quite. As mentioned, Kirby's insanely slow movement speed makes replaying the game in any capacity more sluggish than it should be, especially due to the levels being quite long. And while I don't think this is as big of an issue as in say 2D Kirby games, since the focus here is more on relaxing exploration, which lends itself more nicely to a slow going experience, it is still enough of a problem that it bothers me ever so slightly. And in order for a game to be S tier for me, it can only have trivial nitpicks. Still, for all the game does right, I still can't deny what an excellent title it is overall. Pokemon Legends ZA.
What? How is this game almost first placed on your list? Have you gone completely mad? Haven't you seen how lazy and rushed it is? There's not even any voice acting. It is just because of people like you that Game Freak doesn't care, Albert.
Are you done, Bertel? But yeah, this is a game that I can go back to any time of the day and just completely zone myself out from the hardships of the real world. I've always had a bit of a fascination with the Pokemon franchise, even if I haven't really played too many games from it, but I feel like this is the game that truly turned me into a Pokemon enthusiast for good. It's just got such a pleasant and optimistic tone to itself that instantly puts a smile on my face. Let's start with Lumio City, the main setting of the game. It's true that it's not particularly large, but it's also not small by any means either, and certainly not dull. There are people in virtually every corner of the city, a good chunk of which give you side mission requests to keep you busy, and being able to climb up virtually all of the buildings to discover Pokemon and then jump from or between them just makes the exploration feel so freeing and uninterrupted, as do the real-time Pokemon battles. Unlike previous games where Pokemon encounters were strictly turn-based ordeals, this time all the battles just happen on the go, which feels so refreshing. Not only does it allow for a faster pace, when you don't have to slog through cutscenes and you can just demolish Pokemon in seconds, but the stakes just feel much more grave as well, like in a real battle, when you actually have to be quick on your toes. Oh yeah, and for the characters, holy shit, I love everyone. Everyone is flourishing with so much personality, and while there is no traditional bad guy, I think I actually prefer it like this, since it also allows for all of them to be more nuanced and morally grey. Throughout the game, you kept wondering if this new character or that new one was gonna be the overarching villain in the end, but eventually, you realize that everyone is just trying to help Lumio City in their own way, even if they also certainly go about it in different ways, and some are still better people than others. Corbo in particular might be one of my new favorite characters of all time. Like, why did they give him so much aura? Also, AZ is literally just Hohenheim from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Like, I'm not even exaggerating, they have the exact same kind of character arc and resolution, and that's not even a complaint. The fact that a Pokemon game turned out to have the same level of story depth as my favorite show of all time was such a pleasant surprise. I guess one nitpick I had with the game is that the Rogue and Mega Evolved Pokemon battles got a little weary after a short while, mostly because they took a while to get through, but at least there's no rush in the story. And for the most part, you're free to pretty much do anything, and just go battle them when you feel like it. Otherwise, I absolutely loved my time with the game, and a lot of the issues I've seen people take up with the game, I just don't see them. I know a lot of people like to dunk on the graphics because they're not modern, but I don't know, it looks fine to me. Not everything needs to be hyper-realistic. And the fact that the buildings are apparently 2D images feels like such a non-issue to me as well, because most of the time, I'm too busy focused on the playing to actually notice it. And hot take, maybe, but I'm glad Pokemon hasn't ventured into the realm of voice-acted characters, since it means that I can imagine myself what they sound like in my head. So yeah, when it all comes down to it, this could have very well been my game of the year. It's such a relaxing Pokemon utopia to wind down in, with such charming exploration, characters, and battle system. It's just that my top 1 game was one of a kind. Guys, they did it. Kirby Air Riders, in the 1 month it's been out, might have just become one of my new favorite games of all time, against all odds. Wait, what's that you say? This is the supposed Mario Kart killer everyone's been talking about? Well, I'm afraid to say, but that part would be a complete lie, and frankly, even a dishonest way of looking at this game, since they play pretty much entirely differently and have different attributes that make them stand out. Also, Susie. That said, what I won't disagree on is that this game has the level of care and passion I wish Mario Kart World also could have had. Kirby Air Riders is one of those once-in-a-lifetime video games where literally everything that could go right did so above and beyond. And even the things that should have gone wrong didn't. I never played the original Kirby Air Ride, I heard it was pretty empty and lacking in content, and granted, the online playtest demo didn't really win me over either, it felt both underwhelming and overwhelming simultaneously, but even after just a few hours of playing the full release, literally everything won me over. The most important takeaway you need to have before starting the game is to know that this is not a racing game in the traditional sense. Instead, it's more so a fighting game that happens to have racing elements. It is far more aggressive than any mere normal kart racer, but it's also much more engaging as well. Ironic considering the core controls are actually very simplistic, the only button input you have to do is boost drift to turn around. You don't even have to accelerate manually. But when there's so many ways to attack other players, whether by spinning them out directly, grabbing a copy ability power up on the road, or even just eating and spitting out enemies on the road towards them, you realize the simplicity of the core controls is a blessing in disguise, when there's so much else to think about. So even though there's no Grand Prix for the Air Ride and Top Rider modes, it doesn't matter because the gameplay is just that fun to make up for it. Never mind online ranked makes up for it as well. However, my favorite mode is one that doesn't actually involve a lot of racing at all. City Trial, a roguelite where you build your own machine by looking for upgrades on this giant map, and then once 5 minutes pass, you'll compete in a minigame with that machine. I thought for sure people were overreacting about how good it really was, but no, it is that good and addictive. There's so much replay value, thanks to all of the minigames and different machine build combinations, that I don't think I'll ever get bored. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much content and so many customizable options for everything. There's a ton of different vehicles for you to pick from, all with their own attributes. You can make your own custom designs for them for no reason. Literally everything that Mario Kart didn't give you an option for, this game does. There's even a cute little story mode with replay value as well. And man, who would have thought that Sakurai loved unlockables as much as I do? The unlockable system of this game is so elaborate, with so many different achievements to earn that unlock you stuff, some of which you earn accidentally without even aiming for them, that it honestly could have made up for the lack of a story mode to encourage single players as well. Like dude, I could be here all day glazing just about everything this game does right. I would not be surprised if this remains the best Switch 2 game even long after this console generation is over. Sakurai and his team are just a complete something else when it comes to video game crafting. Literally every potential flaw was thought of, to the point that even as someone who normally doesn't care that much about the Kirby franchise, it might have been enough to officially make me a Kirby fan for real. I'm still gonna hold out on that, but yeah. And for all of these reasons, there was no shade of doubt that this would end up my favorite Nintendo game of 2025. And with that, that wraps up my full ranking of all of Nintendo's new releases that came out this year. Man, this was such a fun video to make. I ended up yapping for quite a bit longer than I initially hoped for, but that's because there's just so much to say about frankly all of these games. Especially as someone who has never really ventured outside the Mario sphere before for Nintendo. Obviously, this is all just my personal feelings. Someone with entirely different gaming tastes might say Hyrule Warriors is better than all of these, so let me know down below what your ranking would look like. Hopefully, you enjoyed hearing about my opinions on these gems. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you did so, and join my Discord server Greenpipe City for more updates. And so with all of that being said, I hope you're all having a lovely holiday and are looking forward to Nintendo's 2026 as much as I am. So now it is time for me to sign off. Until next time.